opportunity so far. So let's open with prayer, and as people join us, we'll get them all up to speed. Lord, we thank you for this day and for the beauty of everything around us. We give you thanks for your love which surrounds us, even in the most difficult of times. Help us to hear the pain of the people in Lamentations, but also help us to hear the words of hope that come to them in the midst of their pain. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So what we'll do now for today is we'll look at the first two of the poems. Next week we'll look at 3, and then the last we'll look at 4 and 5. So if everybody wants to go to chapter 1, I will read the poem to you. Poetry is always hard to listen to, but yeah. Try. And you have to remember, this poetry is not rhyming poetry. In Hebrew poetry, it's much more about imagery and structure than it is about rhyming. So
it's not what we normally
think about as poetry. No, it's not.
Liturgy is a word. I know it goes with that.
It's not like rhyming couplets or anything like that. Here comes Donna. Hi, Donna. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm in here. I have to.
Find the camera?
Look at I got the voice. I had to turn the voice up.
Okay.
Okay, I'm on.
All right. We're just getting ready to do chapter 1. We're going to read the first of the lament poems. And so here it is. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate, her priests groan, her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become the masters, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has made her suffer for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. From daughter Zion has departed all her majesty. Her princes have become like stags that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers in the days of her affliction and wandering all the precious things that were hers in days of old. When her people fell into the hands of foes and there was no one to help her, the foe looked on mocking over her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously, so she has become a mockery. All who honored her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Her downfall was appalling, with none to comfort her. O Lord, look at my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Enemies have stretched out their hands over all her precious things. She has even seen the nations invade her sanctuary, those whom you forbade to enter your congregation. All her people groan as they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see how worthless I have become. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look and see if there's any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. From on high he sent fire. It went deep into my bones. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint all day long. My transgressions were bound into a yoke. By his hand they were fastened together. They weigh on my neck, sapping my strength. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. The Lord has rejected all my warriors in the midst of me. He proclaimed a time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my courage. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should become his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you people, and behold my suffering. My young women and young men have gone into captivity. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and elders perished in the city while seeking food to revive their strength. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. My stomach churns, my heart is wrung within me, because I've been very rebellious. In the street the sword bereaves, in the house it is like death. They heard how I was groaning, with no one to comfort me. All my enemies heard my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. Bring on the day you have announced, and let them be as I am. Let all their evil doing come before you, and deal with them as you have dealt with me because of all my transgressions. For my groans are many, and my heart is faint.
That's what I say.
So, what do you hear? What do you wonder about? What are you thinking as you hear all that?
Be glad you're not hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very happy.
Boy, they really destroyed it.
Yep.
The Babylonians, they completely destroyed Jerusalem and the southern kingdom.
Yep.
This, it includes Judah.
Yep.
And I noticed that in the NRSV, they suggest that it was written from Judah.
Yeah, they
Some
think.
author there. I can't imagine how you can keep saying the same thing over and over again. It must have taken more than a few hours to do this, maybe over the course of a week, thinking up all of these terrible things that have happened and involve the past, the present, and the future. It's got to be a hard thing to write.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it's hard to read. You know, this guy's having a bad day. If he did it all in one day, it's really, really terrible. But it fits with Job to some degree.
I have one question, and it's sort of off center.
Yeah, Cindy wanted to say something.
Okay,
Go ahead, Cindy.
The picture I got was what we've seen, what happened in Beirut. Just everything's leveled. What do people do? There's no food. There's no place to live. There's no health. It's like hopelessness.
Yep.
My off-center question. It's in 4.
1:4.
Yeah. Why are gates so important?
Oh, because gates are a sign of, first of all, gates are the symbol of the city's safety. If you have gates up and they're standing, then people can't just walk into your city and do whatever. That they're desolate is almost all the business, almost all the transactions and the important stuff happened around the gate of the city. So you have stories even in the Bible where people assemble at the gate of the city to make a decision about things. Now there's nobody there. It's just desolate, empty.
Is there, I remember reading in that, I was thinking, there must have been a lot of animosity towards Israel with this nation that has one God, and it's the God. It's a God over all your gods, and all the things you thought about in your traditions around them.
Mhm.
And then this big temple on the hill, just a city set on a hill, a light to the world.
Mhm.
I just, and maybe I just thought of what the Nazis did to the Jews. And I was reading this.
Well, certainly, I mean, from what I know historically, and history is hard to piece together.
I know.
One of the problems that we have anytime we study biblical material is how do we piece that history together? But historically, it seems it was less about them being Jews. And for the Babylonians, it had to do with, you were supposed to be, we took over you. You are supposed to be our loyal vassals. You rebelled. The price of rebellion is that we crush you. That's essentially, from the Babylonian perspective, that was what they were about. From some of their neighbors' perspective, it was both, there was animosity between the Syrians and the Israelites because they didn't join the alliance that they wanted them to at first. And so they have their own, their own problems that have come from that. But the indication even in this poem is that a lot of their allies, a lot of their neighbors are just taking advantage of the fact that now your walls are down and we can walk in and take whatever we want. So there's this sense of, okay, this is an opportune time for us just to sack this now defeated country.
Well, look what we do after hurricane.
Yeah.
And then the people come in and loot.
Yep.
Before we.
Yep. There's looting and everything else. And yes, there was some animosity. Probably also people knew that Israel was a wealthy, powerful nation at one point. Well, now it's been brought down. And so everybody takes advantage of the fact that their religion would have been less of a problem because everybody had different religions at that particular point. And yes, they had their big temple, but there was a huge temple in Babylon too, to their particular deities. And so there was nothing, untoward about that on the whole. It's just, this is the price of war. When someone comes through, as Cindy said, this is like Beirut after it gets bombed. Well, this is the kind of stuff you see. It's the kind of stuff you saw in the wars in Croatia and the Eastern Bloc countries, where things were just decimated and people were wiped out. This is the reality that Israel is facing at this particular point. You have, everything is gone. Now, the things that in this poem that are especially, theologically you have to unpack is, first of all, God's the one who did this, according to the poem. God is the one who came through and caused all this to happen.
Yeah, we got to remember that God did this.
At least from their perspective.
Yeah.
Now, you also have to remember that the reason they take that perspective is they also realize their own sin in this reality. So, we have within the structure of this poem, yes, we committed sin. We were unfaithful. We betrayed God. We know that that's what we did. But God has hit us really hard because of that. And our hope is that, if we're going to get this because we were unfaithful and betrayed God, then I hope all our enemies are going to have to eventually pay for the reality that they're having as part of this too. The whole thing, the whole chapter begins with the word "echa," which means how. How in the world did we get here? It's an expression of despair, of anguish, of betrayal. That's all part of what's, going through the hearts and minds of the people here. And they have interesting images. That the image of Jerusalem, of Judah, of Israel in this particular poem is as a widow. So what does the image of a widow bring to mind?
Loneliness.
Okay, loneliness,
Grief.
sadness, grief,
Separation.
separation. What's the status of a widow in those days?
Boy, they needed someone to take care of them, or there was no one.
Right.
They,
They have no power in and of themselves. They have no possessions. They have nothing. If someone doesn't come to their aid, then they are, in essence, destitute. It's an image of death, because you're a widow because someone died, of broken relationships, of all these things. So that image is very has a deepness about it. And not only is Jerusalem a widow, but a widow who has been disgraced, a widow who has now been accused of basically adultery and has had her nakedness uncovered. That's one of the phrases that gets used here. Everything that Israel has been about is now on public display before all the nations of the world. Their failure, their total destruction. They're abused by everyone.
It's like they've hit bottom.
Yep.
Where do we go from here?
Yep.
They've at least acknowledged that there is a bottom. There is an unforgettable. A lot of times we don't want to do that.
Yeah, and even though there are cries and elements of penitence in this poem, it primarily is a cry of suffering. We suffer in the midst of all this. And a question of now what? Where do we go from here? What do we do now that we are in this state?
That sentence, or number, I don't know what verse it is, I got the message in front of me. So I think it's verse 18. God has right on his side. I'm the one who did wrong. Listen, everybody. Look at what I'm going through. Hurting in exile. That's kind of, it's the nation. I mean, he's, or she, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he, or no, it was a woman. The first one was a woman. Anyway, that's out of, stopped moaning and groaning, or she, and is now ready to confront what they have done wrong. But you're still not at repentance. What are we going to do about this? My friends betrayed me, my priests and leaders all left. So back again we are, listen to my groans.
Mm-hmm. And though there's penitence, there's also a sense of, but you did this, God. How could, yes, are we this bad, though, that you are going to totally destroy us? That you're going to totally tear apart everything?
Walking away from the temple. Peterson calls the second poem.
Yeah, and the destruction of the temple is a powerful thing because the temple is the symbol of what?
The heart. It's where they keep the ark.
Yep, it's where they keep the ark.
God.
It's a symbol of their history, I guess.
Their understanding was that God was present in the temple, that the temple was the connecting point between them and God. So if the temple's gone, then your connection to God is gone. The relationship is broken now. And what do you do if God is no longer there?
That has got to be asked again and again and again, that
Yep.
question.
Yep.
That's,
Yeah, it's a universal question.
We
in some
have
ways.
virtual temple services every week. They couldn't have them back in the
No.
oh.
Jackie goes, thank heaven. Now, if you think poem 1 was bad,
yeah, here we go.
you have to listen to poem 2, which in some ways is even more agonizing, is even more difficult than the first poem.
Does it begin with that same word? What was it?
How? Yes. How the Lord in his anger has humiliated daughter Zion. Well, actually, it doesn't begin with exactly the same one, because remember, we're moving acrostically, so we're moving.
Oh, that's right. And this is the first letter.
How the Lord in his anger has humiliated daughter Zion. He has thrown down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. Actually, it would begin with the same, because each one is acrostic. So we start at the beginning of the alphabet as we go into 2. Mm-hmm. How the Lord in his anger has humiliated daughter Zion. He has thrown down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has destroyed without mercy all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath, he has broken down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought down to the ground in dishonor the kingdom and its rulers. He has cut down in fierce anger all the might of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand from them in the face of the enemy. He has burned like a flaming fire in Jacob, consuming all around. He has bent his bow like an enemy, with his right hand set like a foe. He has killed all in whom we took pride. In the tent of daughter Zion, he has poured out his fury like fire. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has destroyed Israel. He has destroyed all its places, laid in ruins its stronghold, and multiplied in daughter Judah mourning and lamentation. He has broken down his booth like a garden. He has destroyed his tabernacle. The Lord has abolished in Zion festival and Sabbath, and in his fury, in his fierce indignation, has spurned king and priest. The Lord has scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hands of the enemy the walls of her palaces. A clamor was raised in the house of the Lord as on a day of festival. The Lord determined to lay in ruins the wall of daughter Zion. He stretched the line. He did not withhold his hand from destroying. He caused rampart and wall to lament. They languished together. Her gates have sunk into the ground. He has ruined and broken her bars. Her king and princes are among the nations. Guidance is no more, and her prophets obtain no vision from the Lord. The elders of daughter Zion sit on the ground in Zion. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young girls of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes are spent with weeping. My stomach churns. My bile is poured out on the ground because of the destruction of my people. Because infants and babes faint in the street of the city. They cry to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" As they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out on their mother's bosom. What can I say for you to what can I say for you? To what compare you, O daughter Zion? To what can I liken you that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter Zion? For vast as the sea is your ruin, who can heal you? Your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. They have not exposed your iniquity to restore your fortunes, but have seen oracles for you that are false and misleading. All who pass along the way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their heads at daughter Jerusalem. And is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of all the earth? All your enemies open their mouths against you. They hiss, they gnash their teeth, they cry, "We have devoured her. Ah, this is the day we longed for. At last we have seen it." The Lord has done what he proposed. He has carried out his threat. As he ordained long ago, he has demolished without pity. He has made the enemy rejoice over you and exalted the might of your foes. Cry aloud to the Lord, O wall of daughter Zion. Let tears stream down like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. Arise, cry out in the night at the beginning of the watches. Pour your heart like water before the presence of the Lord. Lift your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint for hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and consider, to whom have you done this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they have born? Should priests and prophets be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? The young and old are lying on the ground in the streets. My young women, my young men have fallen by the sword. In the day of your anger, you have killed them, slaughtering without mercy. You invited my enemies from all around as if for a day of festival. And on the day of the anger of the Lord, no one escaped or survived. Those whom I bore and reared, my enemy has destroyed. So what images? What?
It's the destruction, it's death.
What?
It's it goes one step forward. It's not just destruction of the city, it's the death of a lot of people.
Yep.
Well, I cannot help but think about the United States of America in one of these lines. Astonished passersby can't believe what they see. They rub their eyes, they shake their heads over DC. Is this the city voted most beautiful, best place to live? I have a feeling that after all of these years of Donald Trump, this is a political opinion, I get that, but it kind of gnaws at me right now because we're not as far along in that progression of destruction, but we're certainly headed that way, it looks to me. I know that's nothing for you to respond to, David. I wouldn't ask you to, but you asking me what's in my heart, and that's it. There's a lot of hearts crying right now.
Well, I was I've told you before, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the former Soviet Union, and we went there 8 years after the curtain went down, and the Soviet mentality was still very much alive. And so I can see what the enemy does to the conquered again and again. We had friends who lived in Lithuania, and they told us that they lived through the Nazis, but when the Nazis left, they picked everything they had and walked away because the Russians were worse, and they knew it, and they were. And so I've seen it. Not just the Nazis, but and it happens again and again and again. 27 civilizations have come and gone since the beginning of the earth.
Yeah, and there are some very disturbing images in this poem, and they're meant to be disturbing. They're meant to describe what the aftermath of something like this is. And I don't think we think about war as terrible, but sometimes the aftermath is even more terrible in some ways than even the war itself. So the temple's destroyed, the connection to God is gone. So all of your beliefs, all of your faith, everything has been crushed in this.
The churches were closed and they were made into music halls in all countries. They're gone. And think of the Chinese with the llamas and gotten rid of them. I don't know why it is that an enemy always has to get rid of anything God.
Well, it's a part of crushing the enemy's spirit. So, I mean, this is the point for the Babylonians in doing this was not only to crush the people, but to crush their spirit, to crush their identity. And, you know, even within our own history, if you want kind of the image of how this sort of understanding of reality works, when indigenous Americans, the Indians, were conquered, what do? We took their people, we took their children away, we cut their hair, we told them, you're not allowed to use your language anymore. You're not allowed to in any way establish and keep your identity. That's the same thing that's happening here. As the Babylonians come through, they, in essence, crush the total identity of the people that they want to defeat, so that there can be no possibility that these people will ever rise up again as someone who will oppose them.
That's what the Russians did. They said, tomorrow you will speak nothing but Russian. And you did. Mm-hmm. Because if you were caught speaking your own language, oh, mama, you were thrown in jail.
I mean, there were even more disturbing images here. The children are starving in the street.
Yeah.
They can't find anything to eat. The very pride of the nation, young men and women, have all been cut down. They're all gone. And maybe for us, the most appalling image in this is that cannibalism sets in the midst of this. You know, people are starving. What choice do they have but to eat the bodies of those who are dead?
Is there much history out there? What do I say? Secular history of Israel in any ancient
There
documents?
There are documents we can
suppose
pull together.
Some of Deuteronomy, Exodus. There's history behind it, at least.
Yeah.
But just wondering.
Well, I think we think of war as guns and shooting. It's not it.
Yeah, it does so much more.
When the enemy comes and conquers, then this happens.
Mm. And you know, for me, this kind of lamentation is the reminder of the cost whenever we choose violence as the option that we're going to use to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. The cost is incredibly high every time we do that. And this kind of lamentation reminds us of this. It's not just, you know, we lost the war. There's much more that goes with all this than that. And what's especially difficult in this poem, and again, you know, we in our context have trouble hearing this, but again, within the Jewish theological underpinnings, and even within our own, sometimes we have to struggle with reality, is that in the thought of the poet, this is all God's doing. You know, God, you know, look at the actions that are portrayed. God casts down, lays waste, ravages, slays, rejects. Those are all action verbs that are used about what God is doing in the midst of this.
And he was right. The woman says God has a right on his side.
They at least recognize their, you know, and oftentimes we don't have the self-awareness to realize that whatever reality comes on us, we have a response, you know, we are, whether in full or in part, responsible for the realities that and eventually catch up with us, you know. And so the people who are there recognize, well, we did some really awful things, you know. We didn't endear ourselves to the people who surrounded us by any stretch of the imagination. You know, we abused, we killed, we looted, and the end result is that now we are the ones who face the same reality. And I think we all, we need to come to grips with when we choose these kind of realities, there's going to be consequences that we pay that go with this reality.
Do you realize how much the world will laugh at us when we go down?
Oh yeah, it will be.
I mean, they're doing it now, and I've met people. I've been subject to, people that just hate America. Whoa.
Yep.
And it isn't, and you know what it is? It was the Europeans, it wasn't the Soviets.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, it's not, I don't think it's unfaithful to our life together as people in America or anywhere in the world to realize that we have done some really stupid things.
Yep.
And there's a price that goes with that, with the kind of arrogance, the kind of, things that we've done over time. There's a price that goes with that. And that's not to say there's nothing beautiful about it. And I heard an NPR show that really touched me. It was, they were talking to an African-American woman, and I didn't catch the beginning of who they introduced as the person they were talking to. But she said, they were asking her about all the stuff that's going on right now with racism and things. And she said, well, but this is a beautiful country. And yes, there are things I hate being here. There are things I honestly have to confront as being evils that are hard. But at the same time, you also always have to see the good. And so part of what our life is that ability both to recognize the blessings that are around us, but not be ignorant to the mistakes and the problems that also invade the world that we live in. And the unfortunate thing for the Israelites at this point is it's hard to see any of the good, because the bad has now reached the point of being so heavy and so difficult at this point. Sure. That's all that they can really take in is the pain and the struggle.
I can understand that. I mean, that city Jerusalem was just laid flat.
Yeah, it was.
And, and Judah, great Judah king, David,
all the promises seemed gone.
Bam, it was gone.
All the symbols of the reality were gone. And yet the interesting thing is that still, who are you going to go to? Well, there's only one source. So cry aloud to the Lord, O wall of daughter Zion. Let tears stream down like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no rest, your eyes no respite. So even though we know there's only one place we can go, that's to the God who maybe we're wondering about, which highlights both the dilemma and the possibilities of having a monotheistic faith, of having a one God faith. Israel doesn't have the option of turning to some other deity for relief. You can't go to another God and say, okay, this one didn't work out. Let's go over there, check out the one over there, because there is only one. But such a situation provides the occasion for not only incredible pain, but an incredible intimacy with this God too, that you have to draw especially close. You have to seek some kind of comfort from God. They're compelled to find a way to reestablish that bond that seems to be broken between them and God. And they're suffering from the consequences in their eyes of a failed relationship. And you can see the sense they have of, and who do we blame this failed relationship on? Us? God? Both? Who knows, they don't, it's not clear to them. But they're not shy about, rebuking God for what they feel is God's part in abandoning them. They admit, yes, we abandoned you, but, does this mean you're going to leave us like this? Look, O Lord, and consider. is the constant cry here.
The Bible is certainly a very, very human book, isn't
Yeah, it is. And it reflects our own struggles in the
it? I was going to
moments of
say,
pain.
that's why it's relevant.
Mm.
We can feel this. We can't experience their particular history. We have our own analogous kind of thing you're talking
Yeah, and
about,
let me,
Jackie.
you know, I had said at the beginning of this, I was going to tie it to some of the stuff that N.T. Wright says in God in the Pandemic. And he makes that very sort of intimate connection between what's going on then, what's going on now, and our struggles with what's going on. And he writes at one point in the book, in the Hebrew scriptures, the greatest disaster of all was the Babylonian exile. And the great prophets interpreted that event in terms of the large-scale punishment for Israel's sin. This goes back to the covenant promises and warnings of blessings and curses in Deuteronomy. Books like Jeremiah and Ezekiel made it shockingly clear Israel had done what Deuteronomy said they should, particularly worshiping pagan idols and the behavior that goes with that. And God had done what God said he would do in consequence. The book called Lamentations, one of the most moving long poems ever written, looks out upon a city from which people have vanished. That image haunts me now every time I cycle around the empty streets of Oxford. This is during COVID-19, normally filled with students and tourists. And the prophet weeps for the innocent children crying for food and finding none. The tongue of the infant sticks to the roof of its mouth for thirst. The children beg for food, but no one gives them everything. Memories of the peoples of ancient traditions of faith only makes matters worse. He goes through some of the other verses. And then a little further on, he's saying, you know, within my own experience of all this, I suddenly see empty streets here and all these. And that leads me to the same kind of grief and struggle and pain. Then a little later in the piece, he writes, in a time of acute crisis, when death sneaks into houses and shops, when you may feel healthy yourself, but you may be carrying the virus without even knowing it, when every stranger on the street is a threat, when we go around in masks, when churches are shut and people are dying with nobody to pray by their bedsides, this is a time for lament. For admitting we don't have any easy answers. For refusing to use the crisis as a loudspeaker for what we've been wanting to say in any case. For weeping at the tomb of our friends. For the inarticulate groaning of the spirit. Rejoice with those who rejoice, said Paul, and weep with those who weep. Yes, and the world is weeping right now. The initial calling of the church, first and foremost, is to take our place humbly among the mourners. Grief, after all, is part of love. Not to grieve, not to lament, is to slam the door on the same place in the innermost heart from which love itself comes. Our culture is afraid of grief, but not just because it's afraid of death. That's natural and normal, a proper reaction to the last enemy. Our culture is afraid because it seems to be afraid of the fear itself, frightened that even to name grief will be to collapse forever. We have to keep going. We have to tell ourselves we have to be strong. Well, yes, we do need to be strong. Strong like Jesus, who wept at the tomb of his friend. Strong like the Spirit, who raised Jesus from the dead and who will give life to our mortal bodies too, but who right now is pleading for us with groanings too deep for words. Strong like the person who learns to pray the Psalms. Strong like the person who waits patiently for the Lord and expects neither easy answers nor easy words. That's what, so he says that, you know, we too lament in this time. And there are no easy answers to what's going on. Everybody wants to say, all we have to do is blah, 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 blah. But it's not that easy. It's not that simple. There, you know, and the first place to start is just recognizing our own pain, our own loss, our own struggle in the midst of these things. And I think for the writer of Lamentations, that's where you have to start too. You can't jump to, and now let's just move on and do this. The first thing you have to do is mourn, is grieve, is lament, is to notice the brokenness. And the book of Lamentations invites us to do that, not only as we look at the history of Israel, but our own lives as well, to ask, where do we notice the brokenness that's there? Do we lament it? Do we understand the consequences in some ways we brought on ourselves, but also realize that they're not all of our own making, and that they're beyond us in some ways, and that there may only be one place we can find any relief from this at all. And that's the God that at times we may even feel abandoned by. All of this is a part of the process of struggling with brokenness in the world. And that's why it's important to, I think, pay attention to what's going on in the book of Lamentations.
You know what else is happening today? No touching.
No touching.
And I'm not a toucher. And my grandkids say, this is how you hug, Grandma. And I give everything I own to be able to hug them.
Yeah. But now we're,
And we can't. And I think it's the physicalness. And I happened to talk to someone I went to first grade on with, and she too said, I can't take this.
Yeah, it's overwhelming in
Yeah.
many ways.
And you have to grieve.
Yep, you have to grieve that. You have to admit that, and it is sometimes hard culturally for us, because we come from that. Well, at least my heritage is German, Swedish, buck up, suck it up.
That's right.
But you can't do that all the time. Sometimes it's just too much.
This time it's too much. This time it is.
And so you have to do a little screaming at God. And there are some times God and I have had some pretty...
He's here. I never thought he went away. It's just that.
But sometimes you want to yell at God too. And
Sure.
What in the world are you doing? Because this doesn't make one bit of sense to me.
Yeah.
Even if I am, I have made mistakes in that. I still don't think this is and it's, sometimes we just need to do that. And then once, I think, and N.T. Wright, and we'll read a little bit of his stuff next time too, says that it's after the lament that then we can ask the question, okay, now what do we do?
Sure.
Just by the way, is a book.
Yeah, God in the Pandemic is N.T.
It's
Wright.
not expensive. $10 or something like that.
Yeah. And so
it's really good. It's short.
What we'll come to now in chapter 3 as we move into that is that there is this moment in the book of Lamentations, in the middle, that we break, and we get some sense that, yes, as awful as this is, and we just had an introduction to how awful it really is, there's still possibility. There's still hope in God, and that's what chapter 3 will be, that introduction to the reality that there's hope. And that's why we'll spend just one section just on chapter 3.
I think for myself, I feel God's presence in ways in this time we're in right now that I haven't all my life. I will sometimes just stop and be quiet. We got a little wooden rocking chair. I'll just sit in it, close my eyes. And I feel like the ancient mystics must have felt when God spoke to them, because things do occasionally start flowing inside you. I know that you probably have all had that same experience. And I count it a blessing of this time we're in that is tough, which I don't always like David. I cry out, but I'm not verbal with it. I
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
Him or her.
I let the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
enter in and help me out here.
So chapter 3 next time, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks,
you.
Cindy, Donna.
Bye, Donna. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. We'll see you later.
I lost your face, but I heard your voice.
Okay, good.
Nice to hear your voice. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, Cindy.